Devin could hardly contain his excitement. He hurried into the dining room, put the package on the table, and turned the chandelier on. Brilliant white light spilled over the room and illuminated his newest purchase. His hand shook as he untied the twine used to keep the brown paper on the box. As a rough cord fell to the tabletop, the wrapper sprang open. Devin pushed the rest of it down and removed the thin silver cardboard container. He sat down, inserted his thumbnail between the top of the box and the edge, then neatly severed the Scotch tape that had kept the container sealed. From within, he pulled out the bill of sale and a piece of heavy-weight paper. Each corner of the curious bit of parchment had been folded in to the center, where they met and were held in place with a thick circle of green wax. The image of a scarab could be seen clearly in the sealing wax. Devin broke the seal and opened the letter. Upon the paper were 5 sentences. The first was written in Egyptian hieroglyphs. The second looked to be Greek. The third was undeniably Latin, and the fourth Arabic, and the fifth was more than likely Hebrew. And Devin could read absolutely none of it. "You do, I trust, have access to the internet?" the dealer had asked him. Devin did have access, of course, and he said as much. "There is a warning here, and a precaution to take," the dealer had said. "You must translate and read it for yourself. It cannot be told. Do you understand?" "Yes," Devin had answered. I understand completely." It was only upon his agreement to research the warning that the man had sold the item to him. For what was in the box, though, Devin would have promised the strange little antique dealer anything he asked for. Devin set the paper down on the table, wiped his hands absently on his pants, and removed his newest piece. A beautiful dark wood case, museum glass, had been expertly fitted between the wooden framework and stood upon a slightly wider base of the same colored wood. Within the nearly 1-foot square case was the true prize, however. It was a diagram of 3 large beetles and a massive, long-legged spider Devin had never seen before. The taxidermist who had built the piece had been a master at his art. Each beetle was arranged artfully upon a trio of branches and dried grass glued to the wooden base. Dirt had been attached to the bottom as well, and several large pieces of dried fungal growth had been secured to the branches. The 3 beetles were of different sizes. The first, and located the highest in the display, was a deep purple, almost black color, no larger than a silver dollar. The second, frozen in the act of leaving one branch for another, was slightly larger, with a dark green color that shimmered in the light. The last, and by far the largest of the beetles, stood in the center. It looked as though it were an Egyptian scarab, except it was a brilliant, powerful gold. Beneath the branches, peeking out from the shadows, was the spider, dark gray in color, with exceptionally long legs. The spider's 8 eyes caught the light through the museum glass and glowed. The antique dealer in Milford had asked for a high price, nearly $300, but it had been worth it. Devin knew he had to have it as soon as he had set eyes upon it. For several minutes he sat at the table and stared at it, smiling softly to himself. Finally, with a happy sigh, he stood up, gathered the paper wrapping and the cardboard box in his arms, and brought them to the recycling bin. He dropped them in, whistling a bit of Bram to himself, and went about preparing himself a cup of tea. As the water slowly came to a boil, he went to his phone, saw there was a message from his ex-wife, and ignored it. He knew his alimony was late. He could mail the check out the next morning. Devin kept an ear open for the kettle, and he went around the apartment, drew the shades, and inspected the maid's work. She had done an excellent job, as always, but his taxidermy collection needed his close attention. Other maids had failed in that part to care for his pieces the way he would like. Janet was quite adept at her work, which was why he retained her services for so long. With his daily inspection finished, he returned to the kitchen as the water came to a boil. After a few moments, he had his mint tea prepared and he sat down at the table. Delicate tendrils of steam curled up from the surface of the liquid, and Devon looked lovingly at the beetles. He had added many beautiful pieces to his collection over the years, but the display before him was absolutely stunning. He was enamored with the scarab, and can see why the ancient Egyptian had worshipped it. The magnificent, almost regal way it perched upon the branch spoke volumes about the taxidermist. The man had taken a tremendous amount of care with the placement of the insect, and Devon honestly didn't believe he could tire of looking at it. Pleased with the newest piece, Devon sighed and drank his tea. When he was finished, he stifled a yawn, took the cup to the sink, and rinsed it before he set it down. He returned to the table, picked up the strange letter and the diagram, and then he carried them both with him into the study. He placed them on the display mantel above the fireplace, turned on the gas flames, and retreated to his leather armchair. He held up the letter to examine it. "Should I?" he asked himself, glancing over at the laptop. With a groan, Devon sighed to himself, out of the comfort of his chair and over to the computer. He continued to stand as he turned the laptop on. He brought up Google and found a translate site and typed in the Latin sentence. "Cursed and bound," the translation read. "Touch not the scarab, lest ye be touched. Life from your life, and evil awakened." Frowning, Devon straightened up. He looked at the Latin, made certain that he had typed it incorrectly, and saw that he had. Curious little warning, Devon thought. He shut the laptop down and carried the letter back to the chair. He put the parchment on the worn leather of the arm, hesitated, then went back to the display. A curse. What absolute nonsense, he thought. A strong desire to feel the scarab on his skin. Licking his lips excitedly, Devon cautiously lifted the top off the case. Unnameable perfume caressed his nostrils, and he smiled. "Of course I can touch it," he thought, grinning. "It's mine." Devon reached in, felt the smooth body of the scarab. The sensation was sensual, titillating, in any way he had ever experienced in an item in his collection. Devon chuckled happily, withdrew his hand, and replaced the top of the case. Whistling to himself, David returned to the armchair, sank into it, and settled back, making himself comfortable. For a moment he considered a celebratory brandy, but he was tired enough. Too early in the evening for liquor, and he would never make it to watch the newest episode of Sherlock on PBS. A glance at the clock on his desk showed it was almost 6. A short nap, Devon thought, yawning again, and then a light dinner. I can have my brandy later, as I watch Holmes and Watson. He closed his eyes, settled into the armchair, and slipped his shoes off, then wiggled his toes through his socks into the thick carpet. He smiled as he thought of his newest purchase. The flames made their curious soft popping sound. From the kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator could be heard. Somewhere out in the parking lot of this building, a car started, the engine loud. All of the familiar noises served a lullaby, and Devon easily drifted off to sleep. A sharp crack sound snapped Devon back to consciousness. He straightened up in his chair, accidentally knocking the letter on the floor, rubbed his eyes, and looked around the room. According to the clock, it was a little after 9, and the darkness beyond the study's solitary window confirmed it. The room was lit solely by the light of the fire. Devon reached out for the floor lamp, found the pull string, and tugged it. He winced at the suddenness of the bulb's light, and it took him a moment to see clearly. Everything in the room was in sharp focus, and he quickly saw what had made the crack. The front of the pane of glass on his beetle diagram had broken. The upper right corner of it lay on the carpet. It glinted in the light of the floor lamp, and Devin wondered how a roughly triangular piece had fallen out, let alone break. He stood up, walked over to the glass, and picked it up. It was curiously warm in his hands. He put the segment on the mantel beside the diorama and smelled the sweet, delicate aroma. He looked at the beetles. Devin straightened up. "Where is it?" he asked, staring at the display. "Where is it?" The scarab was missing. Gone. Vanished from the branch. Devin twisted around and looked at the other segments in the study. Birds and small rodents. The upper portion of the black bear. How the hell could a scarab have disappeared? He thought. He shook his head and forced himself to breathe deeply. With an effort, he brought his racing mind under control and carefully began searching the room. He didn't worry about any rational explanation as to why the glass might have broken, or how the long-dead beetle could have gotten out. Devin focused on the important thing, finding it. He could always have the glass repaired, but it would be at moot point if he couldn't find the beetle. He looked down at the floor in front of the fire. If the glass was there, the scarab could be close by, he thought. Devin got down on his hands and knees. He crawled carefully, wary of any small shards of glass, while he peered around for the beetle. After several minutes of searching, he caught sight of it. The scarab was clinging to the underside of Devin's chair. One of the insect's forelegs moved slowly, greatly pulling at the strands of the black fabric beneath the seat. Without getting to his feet, Devin moved forward, keeping an eye locked on the escapee. He reached out, gently took a hold of the scarab, carefully pulled it out from underneath the chair. The insect scuttled around on the inside of his hand, its legs disgustingly warm. "How?" Devin started to say, but then he stopped. Something brushed past his neck, and he felt a sudden sharp pain. Before he could swear, his arms and legs went stiff. He lost his balance, and he toppled over onto his left side. By the time he struck the floor, he couldn't feel anything. His thoughts were muddy, and the effort to think was painful. From where he lay on his side, he could still see the scarab. He watched it as it turned around and seemed to focus its attention on him. Then from the corner of his eye, Devin saw a sharp move. Dark gray, long legs. Quick, alien movements. The spider from the diorama. It appeared from a shadow, carrying with it a large, pale sack made of finely woven silk. And even though the curious haze in his mind, Devin realized two things. First, it was the spider that had bitten him. Second, the spider was not an it, but rather a she. The scarab climbed down from the chair and joined the spider, taking the sack from her back. The two creatures stood beside each other, and a moment later, two other beetles from the diagram appeared. They took up positions on the egg sac, and the three beetles rolled it towards Devin. The spider danced forward, picking her way delicately towards him with all her grace of an insane ballerina. Part of him desperately wanted to pull away, to get as far away from the spider, but he couldn't. Her venom had stilled his muscles, and when she reached him, she stretched out a foreleg gracefully. The sharp hairs on it caressed his cheek, and then he neither flinched nor screamed. She darted forward. The beetles continued to roll the delicate sack towards him, while the female spider wove a web. She lay the anchor strand under his chin, and soon she raced back and forth across his face. Inwardly, he screamed, furious and terrified at the same time. He tried to pull away. Thin, powerful lines of the silk were laying across his eyes. The lids opened. The beetles disappeared from his line of sight, and when he felt them, legs working together up his neck and onto his cheek, they pushed the egg sac over before them. With great care, they pried open his mouth and tucked the egg sac between his gums. As the beetles backed away, the spider rushed across his face. She pulled his lips closed and sealed them shut with silk. From where he lay on the floor, Devin could see the letter that the antique dealer had pressed upon him. He could see the light glow of the dark green wax seal and fragments of the various languages written in powerful broad strokes. What did the rest of the language say? He thought desperately. Then against the sensitive skin of his mouth, Devin felt the smooth surface of the egg sac and numbly wondered when the spiders would hatch.